Okay,
I think that's
so
it.
we are live.
Is it?
Yeah, so thanks for joining us, everyone here. Really excited to have you all. I think there's probably going to be a little bit of a delay. Oh, and here we are. So we are definitely live right now. Awesome. We made it. Yes.
All right.
We figured out the technology. Thank you all for being here, everyone. Again, very grateful to have
Oh, there
you.
he goes.
Awesome.
That's so
grateful to have you all here.
Yay.
I'm getting a bit of feedback, so I'm not sure if that's on one of your ends there, Tom or Megan.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm
Awesome.
gonna turn the mic up.
There's a little
Great.
bit. Oh, it's good now.
Awesome. So welcome, everybody. Here we are, Edible Plants for Emergencies. Very excited to be here. This is a bit of a stretch for us because normally we'd be doing these kinds of workshops in person, but obviously with the challenges of COVID, things are moving more to an online realm, which comes with some challenges, but also some opportunities. Probably would not have this many people in a workshop, and definitely would not have people from all over the world like we do. It's pretty amazing just how much interest there's been. So hopefully there's something for everybody here. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover every climate zone, but we've done what we can to create an overall strategy. So regardless of where you live, we hope that this information is going to be relevant for you, and there's something that everybody can take home here. So first things first, just want to give an acknowledgement to this beautiful land that we are upon, whether we are near or far. Most of us here are likely settlers to the land that we are a part of, and that comes with some responsibilities. And one of that is to acknowledge the ancestors of the land. So here in the area known as Victoria, we are in Songhees territory where we're based right now, and we are very grateful to be on this land and give thanks to all those who've come before us. And I encourage you, regardless of where you are, to take a moment and just really connect with the ancestors of the land and give thanks to them for being here, and also to give thanks to all of our ancestors, because all of our ancestors have been on quite a journey to get us to where we are here now, and have likely endured some incredible sacrifices to be here. So just wanting to honor those ancestors and give thanks, because without them, we would not be here. So with that, I'll give a little bit of information about us. My name is Joshua, and we have Megan here, and we are part of Edible Landscapes Design based in Victoria. And we're a small team based in Victoria working with our clients to design and install edible landscapes that nourish the body, feed the soul, and regenerate the land. And we're very excited here today because we are being joined by a special guest, Tom Krall, nature chef. And he is relatively close to us out here. And I'll just pass it over to him to just say a quick hi to everybody here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, for showing up. That's a big part. Thank you, Joshua, for your work that you do, and Megan supporting. Yeah, I'm really honored to be here, this platform, and sharing what I know. As someone shared to me, I'm just passing this information through. So yeah, I appreciate you, just the interest here, and for nature, to connect with her. And yeah. Oh, I'm out in Sauk Nation. It's probably like 45 minutes from Joshua, on the coast, not too far from the beach. So yeah, the Wild West Coast, where I've been called to settle.
Nice.
Awesome. So Megan's going to be kind of moderating the chat and answering questions if and when they come up here. And big shout out to Megan. She is tirelessly behind the scenes and really keeping this ship afloat in many different ways. So thank you, Megan, for all your work. And if you have any questions, you can pass it on to her there.
Yep. Happy to help.
Awesome. So a little bit about how I got here. I wanted to take a moment and acknowledge my grandparents. They had a farm when I was growing up. My mom grew up on a farm, and without them, I probably would not have the interest that I do in growing food and being self-sufficient and prepared. They've been a huge inspiration to me, also to my parents, and I've got a number of teachers, Kim Chi, Javin Bernakovich, Brandon Bauer, Richard Walker, and Darren Doherty have probably been my most significant influences and teachers, and that is how I have come here to be leading this workshop. So today's talk, first things first, we're going to talk a little bit about the here and now, our kind of global situation, why most of us are probably interested in growing food, probably more than ever so before. We're going to talk about fragility and what it takes to create resilience, not only in ourselves, but for our food system as well. We're going to talk about where to begin. How do we begin to start cultivating an overall strategy for creating food security for ourselves in the potential of an emergency situation? So we're going to talk not only about how to deal with an emergency as it happens, but also how to prepare for emergencies as well, because the more prepared we are, just the better off we are. So with that, we're going to talk about some of the most powerful plants that we know for supporting ourselves, and also how to choose plants, like what we're looking for, not only just what the plants are, but why we're choosing those plants. Obviously, we can't talk about every single plant, but we're going to talk about the ones that we think are the most significant. Finally, we are going to talk about reconnection and reciprocity, not only with each other, but to the land, and how that relates to food security. So with that, we are also going to, once we start to talk about this strategy, we're going to be looking at the concept of zones. So looking at sorry, every once in a while here, I may get a little bit nervous because it dawns on me how many people are actually listening to this. And it's a very weird thing,
No
just
pressure.
in my house right now, knowing that that's happening. So if things get a little weird for a moment, that's probably what's going through my head. I'll recover, but that's what's happening right now. So, okay, so we're going to talk about zones. So where we can have the most impact is starting first with ourselves, right, and spiraling outwards. So we're going to talk about zones in permaculture. We often look at 5 zones, like zone 0 being the home, zone 1 being areas that we travel to basically every day, zone 2 being areas that we travel to every other day, zone 3 kind of more on a weekly or monthly basis, zone 4 looking at more areas we travel to on a seasonal basis, and then zone 5 looking at that more as the wild or the unknown, possibly places that we don't go to ever. So with that, we've also added the zone 00, which we call the inner landscapes. And in that section, we're going to talk about some of the mindset and psychology and what it takes to create resilience. So we'll be starting with zone 0, and then we'll be looking at strategies for each different zone and how that relates to food security. So first things first, we are on a learning journey, and I see that I'm missing the EY on journey, but that's okay. We are on a learning journey, and even though the stakes of an emergency are obviously quite high, that doesn't mean that we need to be looking at this as a high pressure circumstance where we can't make mistakes. Oftentimes making a wrong decision is better than making no decision, because at least we can learn from a wrong decision. So giving ourselves permission to fail and just get started is half the battle here. So I used to share this slide. Well, I've shared this slide for a number of years now, and you may notice the bare grocery shelves on the top right hand there. And that used to be very theoretical. And last year, many of us in Western countries anyways, began to see bare grocery shelves for the first time. And suddenly that 72 hours of food supply on grocery store shelves was no longer theoretical. This was a reality. And strangely enough, it began with toilet paper, but soon it wasn't. Soon it was all canned goods and things like that. So it really highlights how fragile our food system is, recognizing that it's not always going to be there if there's some little disruption. And there's so many different types of disruptions. most food travels 1,500 kilometers before it reaches our plate. Obviously, there's some major implications, whether that's fossil fuel use, but efficiency alone, something really needs to change there. So we're starting to see what happens when little shocks to the system occur. But fortunately, all the world's problems can be solved in the garden, as Jeff Lawton has so eloquently put. And that doesn't just mean that, it can be grown in the garden, but even just a thoughtful moment of reflection in the garden is often exactly what we need to come to some solutions. So here we have this beautiful little diagram talking about or illustrating what a fragile food system is and what a resilient food system is. So as I'm talking here, just take a moment and take that in and notice what you see there. And what I see first and foremost is that in a fragile food system, the energy is moving in a linear fashion. It's moving from essential distribution, and it's moving down the levels to the consumer. Whereas when you're looking at a resilient food system, this is a food system that has many, many different interconnections. And it's those interconnections that actually create resilience and stability. So that is what we are going to look to create here. We are going to be looking at creating a diverse food strategy with many different interconnections rather than being reliant upon just a single central source, i.e. the grocery store. So a couple key terms here, looking at fragility, resilience, and anti-fragility. So a fragile system is damaged by disorder. It's pretty self-explanatory there. A resilient system is unaffected by disorder. So the definition of resilience is to be unaffected by change or to recover quickly from change. And again, ultimately that leads to being unaffected by disorder. But what we are looking to create here is actually a system that is anti-fragile. And an anti-fragile system is a system that actually benefits from disorder. So you may have heard of this concept in the as it relates to businesses. What is an anti-fragile business? One example of an anti-fragile business is, interestingly enough, growing food. When there's shocks to the system of society, growing food just becomes all the more important. Also, alcohol production is also an anti-fragile industry. When things get difficult, people generally want to drink. Also, fireworks. It seems that as shocks to the system come, there's always a budget for fireworks. People want to celebrate even when things are tough. So lots of different examples, but we are looking at this here in the context of food security. So I mentioned this before, looking at diversity. So there is no one single plant and there's no one single strategy. There's no one single solution that is going to be our savior here in this example. So in nature, there are no monocultures. So a monoculture is generally perceived along in the realm of agriculture. So thinking of a monoculture crop would be, for example, growing a wheat field, which, although very productive, is not how things grow in nature. Nature grows a diversity, more along the lines of a forest. So in this diagram here, you're going to see on the left an example of layers of a forest garden. And on the right, you're going to see a little model of ecological succession. So if you see on the ecological succession, I guess I can actually highlight this here. Right here, we are seeing disturbance. So in nature, when there's disturbance in a forest ecosystem, whether that's through a flood or deforestation, the first thing that happens is that annual plants begin to move in and start to colonize and take over the soil to protect it. Now, our food system is almost entirely built upon annual plants. So in agriculture, we see this model most familiarly through tilling the soil, creating a disturbance. That disturbance creates opportunity and release of nutrients, and that allows us to grow annual plants very, very well. However, in nature, this is not where it ends. And it's through the development of diversity and a succession plan that we start to see the rise of a forest ecosystem. So after the annual plants come in, we're going to start seeing some nitrogen fixing pioneer species. Here in our microclimate and region, it would be alder trees that begin to start growing up and shading the soil. And as they take over, the next succession will be the larger coniferous trees, eventually moving to a climax ecosystem. Here it's often Douglas fir or cedars. And that's essentially what we are going to try to create in the long term. So we can't rely on annual foods. Every single society that has relied on annual agriculture has collapsed, and we are not immune to that. Each year that we farm with annual agriculture on an industrial scale, we're losing a lot of soil. It's more than we can go into. It's not the point of this talk here today, but ultimately in the long term, we need to shift from annuals to perennials. So yeah, we need to, I'm doing that thing where I get nervous again. So, okay. So moving on. The big message here is that when cooperating with nature, everything multiplies positively. And that's what we're talking about when we mention this succession planning here. So cooperating with nature, not trying to keep it in this holding pattern of annual agriculture, but actually moving with the natural cycles and allowing succession to occur. The first step of actually doing that is actually learning how to observe nature. And this quote here is an excellent example by our good friend Leonardo da Vinci. The average human looks without seeing, listens without hearing, touches without feeling, eats without tasting, moves without physical awareness, inhales without awareness of odor or fragrance, and talks without thinking. That last line touches a nerve. I'll just let that sink in for a second here, because ultimately we can't give you every single solution here, but what we can try to impart to you is this idea of being more in touch with nature and observing. So this next quote here is how to actually observe. And this quote by Marcus Aurelius: "Nothing has the power to broaden the mind as the ability to investigate systematically and truly all that comes under thy observation in life." So that is what we are trying to imprint upon us all here with this concept of zones. So that is the system. And one more quote here before we really dive into things. "The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings." So what brought us here today is ultimately an understanding of the discord that we are in with nature. So by growing food, I'll just speak for myself here, I have become much more sensitive, much more attentive, and much more aware of my surroundings. And I think that anybody who starts growing food and working with plants, it's inevitable to happen. Starting to pay attention to the smaller things in life and how those connect to the bigger things. So, inner landscapes. This includes attitude, awareness, beliefs, emotions, vision, values, goals. And this is really where it starts, because in dealing with an emergency, all of these things here are going to have the utmost significance. So in creating resilience, psychologists define resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, events, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stressors. And I would say that this pandemic is definitely something that is testing many of our resilience. So how do we actually create resilience? So this here was created by the Americans, the psychology, I can't remember, anyhow. So this started, okay, just go through the principles here. This is so strange, so I'll pull through this. Ultimately, we need to cultivate a belief in our ability to cope. We need to stay connected with our sources of support. We need to talk about what we're going through, be helpful to others, activate positive emotion, cultivate an attitude of survivorship, and seek meaning. Now, this ability to cope, this is something I want to bring back to our ancestors here. Every single one of us, if we are alive here today, our ancestors has been through very likely something unimaginable, unspeakable. And here we are. We are still here. Despite all odds, we are still here. And if we just take a moment with each of these things here, it's really going to increase our capacity to grow our food. So we're not going to dwell too much on this here. But the next thing that I want to mention is that we have so much more abundance than we may think. You know, a lot of people have limiting factors about why they can't start growing food, whether that's, you know, a lack of financial capital, a lack of experiential capital, a lack of materials, a lack of people to help them. So this model here, the 8 forms of currency, was put forward by Ethan Rowland and Gregory Landois in their book, Regenerative Enterprise. And I highly recommend this as a resource for people to start understanding their abundance and wealth in a different way. So this is something that we work with people as we're working on our designs to help gather resources and to start to cultivate capacity. Now, this quote here by Bill Mollison, I think, was just very inspiring and really kind of helps to take off some of the pressure of what we're actually working with here. So the greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production, even on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us can do this, there is enough for everyone. So when working with nature, not everybody needs to do this. Not everybody needs to grow food. You know, one apple tree can produce enough apples for many, many people in the neighborhood. So this is not something that every single person has to do. We just need 10% of us. So that was very helpful to understand that not everybody needs to be on board. We just need enough people to be on board. And fortunately, in Canada last year, actually more than half of people were growing food at some level. And 1/5 of those people were growing it for the first time. So we're really seeing a huge influx of people growing food. And I think this is very encouraging all around the world. So looking at zone 0. So this is home. So this is where we look at what can we actually grow indoors. And so whether you're living in an apartment or even if you're not, starting at home is an excellent option. So we're talking about how do we grow food that's going to have an immediate harvest. So one of the best ways that we can do that is by growing sprouts and microgreens. It still counts as growing your own food. Very easy, very quick, and incredibly nutrient dense. Sprouts and microgreens, so much more nutrient dense than most greens that are going to be growing out in the garden. And one of the reasons why is because as they're young, all of these enzymes, these growth factors are highly dense, so much potential energy in those sprouts. So I really recommend getting sprouts from Mum Seeds. This is I believe it's a Canadian-based company, but they do ship all over the world. So looking at this overall strategy here, one of the things that we can do is we're going to need seeds, right? And we are seeing incredible shortages of seeds all around the world right now. It's actually unprecedented. And quite frankly, quite disturbing to realize that you just can't buy what you want whenever you want. So one place that is definitely not sold out of seeds is sprouting companies. So accessing seeds right now is going to be quite difficult. West Coast Seeds here in Canada is sold out of most of their most popular varieties. They're one of the biggest seed producers here, and all over the place there are major shortages. But again, reach out to sprouting companies, and not only are they very likely to have seeds, but they're also very likely to have them incredibly cheap as well. So that's one of the things that we wanted to remove, was a barrier of cost for people. So Looking at the sprouts, I'm going to recommend a number of specific varieties. Often there's a Brassicas blend. So this Brassicas blend is not only great for sprouting, just eating the sprouts, but these seeds can also be planted in the garden. So this here, this Zone 0, looking at the sprouts, looking at the seeds, this is actually part of creating the foundation of the food security strategy. So the Brassica blend, there's a spring salad blend, there's a peas blend, nasturtium, radish, Swiss chard, sunflower. All of these seeds can be planted in the garden, and there's many, many more. But again, I don't think you're going to find a better price on seeds, and quantity is going to be something that's very significant and very important. So of those, I just want to highlight sunflower for a quick second here, because sunflower makes an excellent microgreen. And this is something that you can buy in a very high quantity, actually in the form of bird seed. So most bird seeds, if you go to a agricultural store or even a pet store, you're going to find bird seed there. And pretty much no bird seed is ever treated with anything. They don't need pesticides because they're very resilient plants. They don't really need many inputs at all. So purchasing bird seeds from an agricultural store is a great opportunity. You can buy them in a 50-pound sack. And why sunflowers in particular? It's because they are very high in protein and fats. And being able to grow protein and fat is something that is extremely important in an emergency situation, a survival situation. And even in the form of a microgreen, black oil sunflower seeds in particular, they're very high in fat. So that's something that is, if there was one seed that you're going to purchase, I would say that sunflower seed would be a great place to start. Microgreens as well. So difference between microgreens and sprouting. So sprouting is generally done in just water. So you can do it in a jar with a little screen or some cheesecloth, soak it overnight for 24 hours, drain it, and keep rinsing it, and you're going to have those sprouts. Microgreens are usually grown in a very small layer of soil or compost, mixed with some perlite, generally speaking, for some drainage. And these are going to be a little bit higher in nutrient density because they're actually picking up some nutrients from the soil itself. Takes a little bit longer to grow, but is very nutrient dense. One, I guess, advantage of it, or I guess disadvantage of that potentially, is that you're going to need to have soil in order to do this, which can be a good thing because that soil can be, after the microgreens have been grown, that soil can be composted again and used further down in the system in a veggie garden. But if you're living in an apartment or something like that, hauling soil up and doing something with it may be more than you want to get into. So there's a few differences between that. But Zone 0, the house, this is where a lot of seed starting can happen as well. So thinking about Zone 0 as the foundation for your food security, the sprouting, the microgreens, the starting the seeds, and you can even do things like grow indoor mushrooms as well. So that's kind of a whole other world in and of itself. So we're not going to spend too much time on that, but that's a photo of some oyster mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms grow in a huge variety of substrates, coffee grounds. They can be grown in a 5-gallon bucket. Very delicious, very medicinal, great for cholesterol. But again, that's kind of a whole other topic in and of itself. So Zone 1. So this is areas that you're going to be traveling to basically every day. So in our design practice, we like to call this the area of handy herbs and greens, because, ideally, if you're cooking something, you want to be able to just hop outside and grab one of your fresh herbs and not have to worry about burning something on the stove. And eating greens, if you're able to harvest your salad in your slippers, it's just going to mean that you're going to eat way more greens. So keep them really nice and close. And this is an area for regularly harvested, regularly maintained, nutrient-dense foods. So within this realm, so many different medicinal herbs that can be grown. And again, that's an entire workshop in and of itself. But in the context of emergencies, it's going to be really important to keep our immune systems high, keep ourselves protected from stress. Again, this is a whole other workshop in and of itself. in the future, we are going to be launching a podcast, and we're friends with some really great herbalists, and we'll definitely be having them on, and looking forward to diving into that. But again, more than we can get into for today. So the first family that I want to highlight here is the mint family. Now, the mint family is not just mint plants, not just your spearmint and your mint, peppermint, but also plants like lemon balm, bee balm here, also known as bergamot or wild bergamot, which if you drink Earl Grey tea, you're going to be familiar with this flavor. It's a very rich kind of velvety taste, and it's just an incredible plant, not only for putting in teas, but also for attracting beneficial insects. So as we're talking about creating a resilient food system, we're also talking about creating resilience in our garden. And that means having lots of beneficial insects. And pretty much all of the plants in the mint family are going to be great for attracting beneficial insects. So the mint family also includes plants like lavender, thyme, rosemary, oregano. Now, although this may not seem like these are not high calorie plants, again, these are plants that are going to be making, they're boosting our immune system, but also just giving us some tasty flavor. And never underestimate that in a time of stress. Particularly a plant like mint. I have a couple of pots of mint growing outside my house, and just being able to come home and grab a little piece of that and smell that mint is a pretty amazing state change. So in times of stress, modulating our stress levels is incredibly important. Again, lavender, very relaxing. So these are all plant friends that can be very, very helpful to us. The next family that I want to talk about here is the allium family. And alliums are one of the hardiest plants that you can grow, very pest resistant, very easy to grow. And that's some of the things that we want to focus on for this workshop here, is not just plants that are going to be producing calories for us and nutrition, but also plants that are really easy, because in the context of emergency, you're going to be having a lot of stuff to deal with. So having plants that can take care of themselves is going to be something that is very, very important here. So some of these plants are going to take a little bit longer to grow. Garlic obviously is something that's going to take, almost a year to mature. So in the case of an emergency, planting some garlic and waiting until the summer is probably not going to be your best strategy. But growing something like scallions, they're very quick, about 21 days to harvest, and you're ready to harvest those plants. Another one is green onions. So if you want to kickstart this here, you can actually just purchase green onions from a store and just plant them directly in your garden and let them start to grow a little bit, and then chop them back. And now you have a green onion plant very, very quickly. You're not having to start it from a seed. So we're going to talk about a few of those different strategies that you can just get things growing very, very quickly, and take some of the stress out of that, especially for people who are just starting this for the very first time. Okay. I'm going to do a quick time check here. Wow, we are right on schedule. That's exciting. Okay. So nasturtium. Nasturtium is another plant that was included in the list of sprouting seeds. So again, this is something you can buy from a sprouting company, very cheap, very easy. And these plants are going to be excellent for attracting beneficial insects to your garden. If you're not familiar with them, they have a very kind of peppery taste, add a lot of spice to your foods, and you can do some really interesting things with them. As the leaves grow larger, you can use them to make little wraps. Very, very tasty. You can stuff them full of all sorts of different things. And you can also pickle them to make capers, I believe. Have you ever done that, Tom? Yeah. Awesome.
Yes, capers and pepper, black pepper. Like dry the seeds and put them in the pepper mill.
Amazing. So again, looking to localize our spices. So many spices are from all around the world, but the more spice that we can grow at home, all the better. So next we have lettuce. So I'm including lettuce here, and although lettuce is mostly water, so this is not going to be something that you're going to be able to just survive on lettuce alone, but it is one of the fastest growing crops that you can grow. So you're able to harvest it in about 30 days. It grows in the cool and kind of part shade areas for folks who don't have a ton of sun. It's better to not grow it in direct heat, otherwise it's going to bolt. Again, it's a very quick harvest, so if you want to have lettuce throughout the season, it's going to be important to replant. So if you do that about every 14 days, you're going to have enough to last you throughout the season. Brassicas. So brassicas are incredibly easy to grow and include a huge realm of different plants here: broccoli, kale, collards, cauliflower, mustard, Brussels sprouts. These are all actually from the same plant family, and they've just been genetically bred to select for different features. So, for example, broccoli was bred to select for the flowers. Kale and collards are more for broad leaves. Cauliflower also for a flower. So all of these plants are going to have a fairly similar nutritional profile. So again, looking at diversity, it's very important not only for our gardens to have diversity, but also for ourselves, for our own nutrition. The average person now, I think it's 10 vegetables, only eats about 10 vegetables. Technically, this brassicas, it's the same plant. So you're not getting a ton of nutritional variation between each of the different brassica plants itself. So having a diverse diet is incredibly important. In the past, they've done samplings of hunter-gatherers that they've found their stomach contents of, for example. And there's a kind of a famous story. I can't remember the name of this person, but they found somebody, I don't know, frozen in the ice, 10,000 years old or something like that. And they had somewhere between 300 and 500 different plants in their system at that one time. So that just gives you an idea of the level of diversity that was being consumed and how far we have come from that. So that has huge implications, not only for the sustainability of our agriculture, but also just for our own nutrition levels as well. Swiss chard. So Swiss chard is incredibly easy to grow. It is beautiful as well. This is one of these kind of edible ornamental plants. And the great thing about it is that it can actually produce 2 different harvests. So it's going to produce the leaves all throughout the season. It usually grows for about 1.5 years. And then after 1.5 years, depending where you are, obviously, in our climate, it can grow up to 1.5 years, 2 years. But after it goes to seed, the leaves are going to start to get quite more bitter. But at that point, you can still cut that stalk and chop it up and saute it, and it can be used in a bunch of different things. So even after the leaves become a little bit bitter, you can still do something with the stalk. Again, very easy to grow. One of those plants that just doesn't have a lot of requirements and is going to keep producing for a long period throughout the season. So that's another thing that you're going to be wanting to look for in plants for emergencies, is plants that can produce many harvests over a long period of time. So one chard plant is often enough for one person. I like to grow a bunch of them, but you can just harvest them over and over and over again. So this one here, New Zealand spinach, is one that Megan introduced to me a year or 2 ago. And this green is just an absolute treat. And I think I'll just pass over Megan here to say a couple notes about that.
Yeah, it's a really great hearty spinach. It's not a real spinach, but it tastes very much like it, and it grows very easily in not even the best soil. And I love it a lot because it keeps for a long time in the fridge. If you pick off the leaves, it'll keep for like 2 weeks. Totally great in the fridge, which is amazing. And then if you live in a warmer climate, I think maybe like zone 10, 9 or 10, it could be also perennial or biennial, I'm not sure, but it'll survive through the seasons. So it's a pretty cool one. But otherwise, it is more of an annual for the cooler climates, especially here in Canada. So I highly recommend it for your garden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'm not sure if you mentioned that, but it also requires very little water as well. It's kind of almost like a succulent, and it has these quite thick, dense leaves. When you chew into them, they're quite juicy, and again, they actually, yeah, they last for so long. It's the strangest thing. You leave them in the fridge 2 weeks later, and they taste like they just came out of the garden, which is pretty rare. So again, in the context of emergencies, it's going to be really important not to waste our food. About 40% of the food that gets grown around the world gets wasted, whether lost in shipping, spoiling, so many different ways. But when you grow your own food, you begin to understand how precious it really is, and let alone if you actually need to survive on it, if there's no other options. So zone 2. So in zone 2, this is areas that we're going to be traveling to not necessarily every day, but potentially every other day kind of situation. So if you live in an apartment, or if you live in an area that doesn't have, that you don't have access to a garden, zone 2 may not even be in your house. Zone 2 may be at a friend's house. Zone 2 may be somewhere, ideally between where you live and your place of work. So whether it's in your house or not, zone 2 is going to be an area where you have the opportunity to start growing other types of crops that are going to take a little bit longer to grow and are not going to be harvested every day. So in the kind of handy herbs and greens section, you can eat greens every single day. They grow quickly, and you need to keep a really close eye on them. In zone 2, that's where we can start to grow some of those longer maturing plants. So the first thing I want to talk about is radish. So radish is a very fast growing plant. It's going to be one of the quickest harvests that you can get. Lots of different kinds of radishes that you can grow. And again, this is one of those ones that you can get in a seed sprouting blend. So if you want to get really cheap seeds and stock up on them, again, I stress this, buy some sprouting seeds. The radishes, again, you're going to want to have a diversity of them. Each different color of radish is going to have a slightly different nutritional profile, and it's just fun to have lots of different colors too. So I think these ones on the right are kind of like I think they call them like Easter egg radishes is one name. There's your more traditional radishes on the top left. And then in the lower left is the Daikon radish. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future section. But Daikon radish is also sometimes known as a tillage radish. Because it kind of, anyhow, we'll get more into that later. But Daikon is also very commonly used in, I love it on like Vietnamese subs, like fermented with some carrots is incredibly delicious. You can roast them as well. But this is a very, very versatile plant that, again, I'll talk more about it in future sections, but this is definitely going to be one that you're going to want to get. So the next plant here is amaranth, and amaranth is one of these kind of more ancient indigenous grains that is incredibly nutrient dense, very high in protein. Very high in protein and very, very easy to grow. For folks that are looking for something beautiful in their garden as well, you can see it's got these incredibly beautiful kind of red flowers. There's different colors of amaranth. There's like a purple amaranth. There's more yellow amaranths. But again, this is one that you're going to be able to get very cheap seeds from the grocery store. So even just the amaranth that you find just to cook, you see in the top right there, there's the grains. You can cook it kind of like a rice or a quinoa. You can just purchase those seeds from a grocery store, very cheap, around $3 a pound, and you can get a whole bunch of seeds very, very easily. The great thing about this is that you can harvest it all throughout the season. It's very hardy. You can plant it basically as soon as the soil can be worked, once it warms up, and it's going to grow all the way through the growing season. And it's a plant that not only are you going to be able to harvest the seeds from it, but you can also eat the greens from it. So you're getting a double harvest there. You can eat the leaves as it's maturing. Once it goes to, you can keep the seeds. You can mill it into flour. You can sprout them for next season. And again, they are absolutely prolific producers. You can get a whole bunch of seeds. So an excellent option. And storage. storage is another factor that we haven't quite talked at yet, and Tom's going to talk a bunch more about that in the future sections. But it's not just about what we can eat right now, it's also what can we store for later. So amaranth is one of those excellent storage plants. Okay. Now this new one here, this is a Horizontle, and this is actually not a plant that I have grown, but as I was doing some research for this plant came up and it really intrigued me. So this plant here is native to Mexico, and it's also related to quinoa and amaranth, and it produces these kind of bushy seed heads, quite similar to amaranth, but it's kind of, it's been described kind of like a cross between a broccoli and an amaranth. So you can see on the left there, it almost has those broccoli floret sort of texture to it. So it can be eaten like broccoli like that. It can also go to seed and you can harvest it that way. You can also eat the leaves as well. But the nice thing about it is that it doesn't bolt like broccoli. It's from Mexico, so it can handle very high temperatures. So here in the greater Victoria area, we get very, very hot summers, very wet winters, but hot, dry summers. So something like this here is going to be a great option for anybody who lives in a high temperature and is having issues with their vegetables bolting and going to seed. So yeah, this is just an awesome one. This one here also, it grows from full sun to part shade, so it's got a good growing variety there, and you can harvest it continually. And in fact, the more you harvest it, the more it produces. So again, this is going to be one of those ones that has a very prolonged harvest, which is very important. And again, like quinoa, like amaranth, this one is very high in protein as well. Pest-free, very resilient plant, but beware about this one because it does grow and spread like a weed. So just know that if you do plant this, it's probably going to spread, and there's worse problems than having food growing everywhere. But just beware. Okay. Beets. So here is a picture of me and my wife because I love that picture of her, and also because I'm really proud of those carrots that I grew last season. So this is just a little bragging moment. That beet on the right there was an absolute gem. The thing that's great about beets is, again, this is another one of those crops that you're going to get multiple harvests out of. The greens of beets are incredibly nutrient dense and delicious and can be eaten all throughout the season and picked off, and you're still going to have a delicious root vegetable that stores very, very well throughout the season as well. So again, if you can have a crop that has multiple harvests, especially a crop that has different kinds of harvests, it's just creating another level of diversity and resilience. So storing these ones here, if you harvest these, the best way to store them that I found is actually in sand. So I put mine into like Rubbermaid containers and just layer them with sand, and they store incredibly well, are very crisp. You can also pickle them as well. But the ease of being able to put them in sand is just cannot be underestimated. And again, there's a reason why carrots are in pretty much every vegetable blend. They grow, they don't need great soil to grow. They store very well. They're rich in nutrients and calories, and can be eaten in so many different ways. It can be frozen, pickled, etc., etc. We're all familiar with carrots, I imagine. Okay. So lentils and peas. So again, protein is going to be very important, and having sources of protein that we can store is essential. So lentils are actually one of the oldest cultivated crops, and they are pretty much the perfect storage protein. They dry very easily. Here in the greater Victoria area, they can be grown lentily. They can be lentily grown locally, and yeah, again, just an excellent storage protein, and they can be sprouted. You can purchase these again at an absolute premium. They can be planted in your garden. They can be sprouted. They can be stored. And they're a very important piece of the food security puzzle. Peas as well. Bunch like whether shelling peas or edible pods, both have their place. They can be stored very easily. Dried, the shelling peas, the peas in with the pods can be frozen. They can be fermented. They can be put in stir fries. And again, they're very high in protein as well, but a little bit less so than lentils. Zucchini. There could be no talk about garden abundance without discussing zucchini. For anyone who's grown zucchini, you'll understand that they are absolutely prolific producers, and probably one of the most abundant plants there is, really. It seems like you pick one, you turn around, and you look back, and there's another one there. So if you're looking for a mass quantity of food, zucchini is definitely going to be a great plant for you. And for many people, just growing one plant is enough. But if you want to keep it coming, having a succession plan is a good idea, because they will kind of stop producing all at the same time if you plant them at the same time. So a couple tips about that, about growing zucchini. You want to make sure they're well watered, especially while they're budding and flowering, and they're going to need a whole bunch of mulch to keep that moisture in there, and that's where those big tasty fruits are going to come from. So we haven't talked about beans, and we haven't talked about squash, and we haven't talked about corn, and that is because they go best together. So many of us are going to be familiar with the Three Sisters Guild, a Native American kind of Iroquois growing technique, where first a corn plant is planted. After it's about maybe 6 inches tall, you're going to plant the beans next to it. And as the corn stalk grows up, the beans are going to climb up the corn like a trellis, and the squash plants are going to shade the soil underneath of it. And the shading of the soil is going to keep the pests down. It's going to maintain moisture, and all of these plants working together are creating what's known as a guild. And a guild is a collective of elements that grow together in a way that supports one another's growth. So the Three Sisters Guild is one example. We're going to talk a little bit about food forestry, and food forestry would be the concept of growing food like a forest. And in nature, in forests, this is essentially the ultimate companion planting system. So companion planting, again, is a building block of a guild. And on the right here, we have an example of a temperate fruit tree guild with a bunch of different elements that are going to be working together. So the fruit tree would be a central element in this guild. It's going to have a nitrogen fixer to take nitrogen from the atmosphere, fix it in the soil as a fertilizer. An example of that in this picture here is a lupin, but it could also be a shrub as well, like a autumn olive or a sea buckthorn. An insectiary plant is also part of the guild, so something that's going to bring in pollinators and beneficial insects. Other plants may be planted as a weed barrier. Here in our climate, that may be something like daffodils or daylilies. And then even the fence. The fence is also part of this guild here. And although it's not alive, it is a part of the system. It is an element that supports the growth of each of those elements. So before we get into the food forestry section, I just want to make note of the fact that growing in guilds is not just limited to plants. So we can all grow in guilds together. So earlier we talked about those 8 forms of capital. We talked about financial capital, material capital, social capital, intellectual capital. Each of us is going to have different gifts and strengths, and we are stronger together. So in creating this food security strategy, we are not an island here. We need to work together. We need to learn from nature, and we need to connect with each other in a way that supports one another. So one person may have a bunch of financial capital, another person may have a bunch of material capital or intellectual capital, and we are stronger together. So again, coming back to that sense of resilience, diversity, connection, reciprocity, this is going to be the key to essentially building resilience. So Zone 3. So in this model that we're discussing here, Zone 3 would be an area that you're going to travel to basically, not every other day, more on a weekly basis, a monthly basis. And this is a great opportunity, a great zone rather, to be growing plants that are going to take longer to mature, that are harvested not as frequently, and aren't going to require as much care. So in our systems, often a zone 3 is a great location for a food forest. Now, if you ask me, a food forest should not just be limited to zone 3. I think food forests should be pretty much everywhere. And fortunately, they pretty much are everywhere if you live in a forested area. So food forestry is this, very recently, it actually kind of hit the mainstream. Martha Stewart had an article about food forestry on her website, and it's kind of hitting the mainstream, and it's kind of touted as this kind of sexy new growing technique. But the reality is that food forestry is pretty much the most ancient form of growing that there is. And here on the West Coast, this whole West Coast has been cultivated as a food forest by the indigenous people for many thousands of years. And that is the story all around the world. The Amazon rainforest has now been discovered to be essentially a human-tended garden for many thousands of years. So the issue is that often when settlers show up to a new ecosystem, they don't actually recognize what is going around. What's actually growing. It may look like it's just the chaos of nature, when in reality it's a highly sophisticated system of plants and animals and people and the earth all working together to create a cohesive, edible ecosystem. So this here is a huge topic that we can't go too in depth into. So we're just going to give you a little taste of it here. We will be hosting a workshop in the coming months. I think in April, we're going to be hosting a urban food forestry workshop online as well. So if this is something that intrigues you, that workshop, we're going to take a deep dive. We're going to spend the whole weekend. We're going to talk about design, installation, maintenance, the whole system. So again, this is only a little taste, and I call it a little walk on the wild side, because this is an opportunity where we're going to start to let go of some of these rules that we might have for our gardens, whether that be growing in rows and crop rotation. This is where we start to get to grow a little bit more like the forest, a little bit more like nature, and kind of let go of control a little bit here. So I'm going to bring up some plants that might scare some of the gardeners amongst us, but it's okay. There's a reason for it. So back to the Daikon radish here. So the Daikon radish, again, is called the tillage radish. And the reason why is because, as you can see, these radishes grow very long and deep into the ground, and they don't really like growing in the heat. So these are best planted in the fall. And they can be planted in very hard and infertile soil. And they're going to grow deep into the ground and essentially till it up. So there's a fellow who runs a podcast called the Survival Podcast. His name's Jack Spirko, and I highly recommend checking out his work. I definitely don't support everything that he says, but he has a lot of great thoughts. And one of the questions he posed when talking about Daikon radish is, how much would you pay someone to come into your garden or your field with a post hole digger and dig 1.5 feet down and fill each and every one of those holes with worm castings? And if you're a gardener, you'd think that's a pretty darn good deal, and that would be worth quite a bit. Fortunately, we don't need to do that work. We can just get the Daikon radish to do that for us. So whether you're going to harvest this radish or you're just going to plant it in the fall and let it rot in the ground, this is an opportunity where you can really start transforming a barren, tough soil into something that's really filled with a ton of nutrients. So planting the Daikon radish is going to bring a ton of nutrition into the landscape for you. And it can also be grown, as I mentioned, as a really delicious food in and of itself. You can roast the radishes, you can pickle them, you can ferment them. But probably one of the best ways to actually eat it is to just let it go to seed and let it go to seed, and it produces these little seed pods that are, maybe 1.5 inches long, and they are absolutely delicious just on their own, but you can also pickle those as well. Pretty much all of the radishes, the little seed heads, are very, very tasty. And again, they grow quite quickly, so if you're growing a whole bunch of them, it's very easy to let them go to seed, and sometimes miss them if they're growing throughout the garden. But those seed pods are very, very tasty. The next one here, calendula. So calendula is also known as pot marigold by some people. And this is going to be something that's going to produce flowers throughout the season, edible flowers, but you can also eat the leaves themselves. And that is something that a lot of people don't do. They're a little bit bitter, but added to a salad or sauteed or fried, they're quite tasty. And this plant here, I would say, is absolutely essential in the garden. Again, this is going to be one of these plants that spreads fairly easily, so just beware of that. But there's so many different things that you can do with it. So on the right there, you can see there's that little link to you can eat calendula. If you just type the title of that link, you're going to find that on Google. There's a bunch of different recipes that you can do with it. But it's also excellent as a herbal medicine as well. It can be put into creams and salves, great for insect bites. There's so many different things that you can do with it. But again, this is one of those plants that it just survives. It just survives. So again, you don't need to do much with it. It's going to keep on producing. It's going to seed itself again. If you want to get rid of it, it's fairly easy to just pull up as well. But I don't really see a reason why, unless it's completely taking over another veggie bed or something like that. But this is just such a bright and cheerful plant that is really, really food for the soul. Celery. So celery is becoming quite the rage these days. There's a lot of people getting into juicing celery. It used to be kind of described as an antioxidant. It takes more calories to actually break it down than it does than you get out of it from consuming it. But the juice is incredibly good for you, great for detoxing the system, and it can be a little bit difficult to start from seed. So one of the techniques that you can actually do, just take the celery stalk, just purchase it from a grocery store if you have that capacity, and just pull the stalks off. And in the very center of it, you're going to find the little kind of the heart of it. It's little tiny little stalks. You can just take that and just plant it directly in your garden. The little stalks with the tiny little leaves that's right in the center, just take that, plant it in your garden, and that is going to grow up into a brand new celery plant. And you can just let that celery plant go to seed. And if you let it go to seed, it's going to start spreading all over the place. And again, now we're talking about food forestry here. So this is where we can kind of let go of some of these concepts of keeping everything neatly in tight rows, and we can just start to let things grow where they want to grow. So if you let nature take its course, it's going to tell you where it wants to grow. So as it goes to seed, you can just keep on harvesting those tiny little plants the next year, and you're going to have an excellent source of celery that you never have to worry about again. And the celery that you grow in your garden, especially when it's young, is so much more flavorful than the celery that you're going to be finding at the grocery store. So just wanted to impart that little trick there. An easy way to get going. So comfrey. Now, it is technically an edible plant. There are warnings about eating too much of the leaves. I do eat the leaves sometimes, just chop up a little of them, sauteed. But it's not going to be something that you're going to want to eat a ton of, and it's not the tastiest in its leaf form. But the flowers themselves are edible, very delicious. And I'm getting a time check message here. Yeah, we're pretty good, Megan. We're running a couple minutes behind, but we're pretty on point. So it's also a great food for ducks, but it's highly medicinal. And this is one of those plants that some people might be worrying about, like, oh, don't ever plant comfrey. I planted comfrey in the garden, and now I can never get rid of it. yes, that can definitely be a problem because these have roots that go very deep and propagate from a very tiny piece. So you'll probably never get rid of it if you plant it. It also goes to seed as well, and it can spread quite prolifically. However, there is a variety, the Bocking 14 variety, and it has sterile seeds, and it's not going to spread by seed. So plant the Bocking 14 variety. You don't have to worry about it getting completely out of control. And as far as a plant that's useful in the context of emergencies, you're going to be hard-pressed to find something more useful than comfrey. It is probably the best wound healing plant that there is. In fact, it heals wounds so quickly that you need to be careful using it on an open wound because it can heal it so fast that it can actually heal like pathogens into the wound itself. This plant is amazing for healing bruises, amazing in salves. In a moment here, I'm going to pass over to Tom. He can talk a little bit more about that. But again, this is just an incredibly useful plant that should just be in every garden. Great for insect bites, very helpful, incredible for bees. The bees love this plant. So again, creating resilience, we need resilient gardens. For that, we need a healthy insect population. So Jerusalem artichoke. So in the food forest system, we like to highlight this plant here because this is another one of those plants that just grows. You don't need to do much for it. It grows big, it thrives, it attracts insects. You don't need to do pretty much anything with it. And as time goes on, you can just dig up the roots and harvest those tubers that are on the right. If you don't dig them up, it's fine. They'll be fine over the winter. It's not like potatoes or something where you actually have to dig them up. They are just going to survive if you leave them in the ground. And they are an excellent source of protein and carbs. They're best fermented because they kind of have a nickname. Artichoke, they're sometimes called fartichokes because they can definitely give you gas. That being said, it's it's powerful gas, but it's not like the worst smelling gas. So as far as yeah, it could be worse. Let's just say that much. But when fermented, it's quite tasty and it really breaks that down. I think Tom might want to say a quick something about that.
Okay. Yeah, with the fermenting sunchokes, I just cut them into like 1-inch pieces, break them up. I'll put them in a vessel, lacto ferment, so salt water, 4%. So a liter of water is 40 grams of salt, and I'll put that in a crock and just cover it up for a few weeks at least to really break down that inulin. That's that chemical compound that gives you the gas. So I find I do that, and then I'll use it for cooking. So I'll do it like when I harvest my sunchokes, I'll put them in a big crock and do the lacto ferment, and then they store well that way, like just having it in a cool place this way. And I have some friends that put it in sauerkraut, mix it in, fermenting it, and you could eat them raw that way.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Okay, so we're a couple minutes behind here right now, so I'm just going to kind of cruise through some of our last items here, and then I'm going to pass it on to Tom. So berries. So many benefits of berries here. Again, this is a whole other world in and of itself. We are going to be hosting another online workshop probably later in the summer, specifically about berries for buckets, barrels, backyards, and beyond. Like the bees there. I'm all about the alliteration, you may have noticed. So berries, delicious, nutritious, very easy to store. You can freeze them, dry them. I like to call them the hardest to resist edible. Sometimes a client may reach out and they want to grow food, and maybe someone in the family doesn't want to grow food. They say, no, I don't want to grow food. It's too much work. Well, my question for those people is, do you like berries? Do you like berries? Because they are so hard to argue with. They don't require a lot of care, and your life isn't going to change a whole lot other than you're just going to have berries. So it's a great place to start and a great way to convert people who don't want to grow food. Again, we'll talk about some of the benefits to ecosystems, specifically nitrogen fixing berries, but that's going to be a topic for another day. But so many different benefits to berries, whether cultivated or wild. Sea buckthorn is one of those berries, the nitrogen fixers. So this is going to fertilize the soil for other plants. This is the most nutrient dense, most nutrient dense terrestrial plant that we can grow here in our latitude. Sea buckthorn is an absolutely incredible superfood. The focus here isn't on nutrition, but this one here has, I think, 10 times the vitamin C as an orange, 185 essential nutrients, including omega fatty acids, 3, 6, 7, and 9. I think it's the only berry that plant that contains that full of a spectrum of fatty acids. So this is a very rare plant. The leaves are highly medicinal. They can be used in tea. They can be fed to livestock. Again, an absolute superfood here. More than we can go into, but one thing I want to highlight about it is it's also an appetite suppressant. So in the context of emergencies, this is going to be one that's going to really help you to feel full. And this is a plant that, again, just loves to survive. Be careful where you plant it, because this one does spread by root runners. So it can be something that it's not a big deal to just cut them back if it's in your own home garden. But, if you're just planting it somewhere in the wild, this is going to be a plant that if it's sunny, it's going to spread. So just be conscious of where you're planting it. Goji berry, again, this one here, also edible leaves. There's some ancient tales of monks in a monastery being raided and being able to survive only on the leaves of the goji berry plant. So again, this is a real survivor plant, and it can help us to be survivors too. So we can go more into that in our berries workshop. And the second last plant in the food forest here is the mulberry. So the one thing I want to highlight about this is not just the berry, which as far as I'm concerned is probably the most delicious berry, but also the fact that it is extremely high in protein, the leaves themselves. So mulberry leaves are actually used to feed silkworm caterpillars, and the amount of protein is what gives silk its strength. So the white mulberries are actually usually used for cultivating silkworms. Again, this is a multifunctional plant. You can eat the berries, you can eat the leaves, you can saute them, you can make stuffed lamb wraps or stuffed almost like dolmades, and they propagate extremely easy from softwood cutting. So this is, again, from a survivor perspective, from a local resilience perspective, plants that propagate are very easily planted in other locations and great for creating overall community resilience. So if you can eat the leaves from a tree, especially a big tree like a mulberry, this is something that can feed many, many people in the neighborhood. And on that note here, looking at tree nuts, a single nut tree can produce an unspeakable amount of food. So from a food security perspective, long term, this is not something that's going to produce food overnight, but what's that ancient Greek quote? Society grows great when people plant trees under which the shade they will never set, or something like that. So again, this is looking forward to the future. Now, on that note here, now we're moving into zone 4, which is the area of seasonal gifts, seasonal access and seasonal gifts. So this is, a lot of the wild foods are going to come, once a season, or maybe twice a season, in the spring and the fall. Mushrooms are included in that category. In a moment here, I'm going to pass this over to Tom, because this is very much his realm, the wild crafting, the harvesting. So some of the benefits of eating wild greens and edible weeds, I call it seasonal gifts, because weeds, if you look at it in the right way, they really are a gift. These are plants that require very little from us. Their nutrient density is very high, so often they're going to have a bitter taste, but that bitter taste is often the vitamins and nutrients that we have bred out of our food. So we've cultivated our greens to not have bitter in them, and then we need to get our bitters in the form of medicine. So if you've ever chewed down most of our prescription medicines, they usually have a very bitter taste to them, and a lot of those are actually synthesized from plants. So those bitters are very important to our own health. So I'm going to pass it over to Tom here, but these are just a few of the plants that I wanted to highlight, and also just take a quick note of this book. This Edible Wild Plants book I think it was the first harvesting book that I got, and I think Tom mentioned it might have been the first harvesting book that he got. The thing I like about it is that it teaches you how to take these edible weeds and turn them into something really delicious. So there's nobody I know who's better at turning wild plants into something delicious than Tom, so I'm going to pass it over to him.
Yes, if we could turn these plants into something we love to eat, that's really what turns me on, or like people on to wild foods, and they do have. So yeah, can you pull that up? We could go through the list there.
Sure.
Yeah, so you got clover. Unlike clover, leaves are pretty common. You'll see in grass, people's lawns and stuff, and you could just put those incorporate that into your salads. So these are the white and the red clover. The flowers are amazing for tea making. It's very nourishing, especially it's kind of like when someone's malnourished. Red clover tea has amazing nourishing properties in it, and very calming as well. The pollinators, bees, love the clover pollen, right? Dandelion, oh my god, dandelion's one of those plants. Like, I didn't have any dandelion growing on my lawn, so I transplanted dandelion to my lawn. But while most people rip them out, but I find harvesting them, like, a lot of people just pick the leaves off. If you could go down, like, get your knife and at the bottom, right at the top of the root, right below the choke of it, and just to cut it there, and you have the whole head of dandelion. You could gather a basket in no time, and that dandelion will just bolt back up. So when I harvest dandelion, that's how I harvest it. It's been a tip that was passed to me, and it works really well. And I always leave, some dandelion. I don't never harvest everything, right? Always leave some dandelion, but the flowers, dandelion flowers, on a sunny day, take a bowl of olive oil, walk around, put the flowers in a bowl of olive oil with some salt, and you leave this on the counter to macerate. It's an old Italian recipe. It's great. It will sit on your counter for days, and when you want to eat your meals, like, you just put it on your meals. You could put it into your salads. It's really good with some balsamic vinegar and focaccia bread, and you could just eat, bundles of flowers. Dandelion flower wine is another one. It's really great with traditional wine that was made. You could look that one up. Dandelion pesto, and just cooking greens and all sorts of that. And then the root, when you get into the root, roasting the root, have a coffee substitute, really good for your liver, flushing that out. It's something I will drink very often with my coffee. Cat's ear is very much like dandelion. Looks just like the dandelion, just has a little more of a fuzzy leaf to it. But get to know that the cat's ear, same thing like the dandelion, uses like that. The flowers are they're a little more bitter than the dandelion. So, but yeah, still edible, and you could as well infuse vinegars. It's really well. Great. And we got chickweed. Chickweed's a great one. It's something as well, like, for me, foraging, like, when I've first got on foraging, like, you're getting into there. So now with like land stewardship, what I've been doing is bringing these plants to my home, to these closer zones, and now I'm foraging at home. It's a great way, and these plants keep coming back. So chickweed's definitely one I have there. It grows really well with the miner's lettuce. I have like patch of it that's spreading now. So yeah, the miner's lettuce, chickweed. There's also like peppergrass that also comes up in that patch. Peppergrass is nice spicy green like that. Plantains are definitely a must for sure to have it available. It's a great first aid treatment. Yeah, for any inflammation, sprains, definitely plantains, good for that. Insect bites, bee bites, like bee stings. If you get a sting, you slap some plantain on that, like make a poultice, slap them, and it goes down like almost instantly. It's also really delicious. Lettuce green, when it goes to seed, the seeds go up, really abundant. You could harvest the seeds and incorporate that into your cereals. Very high in protein. Burdock communities, their cultures, the burdock, like they cultivate the burdock, and it's amazing. They get like 3 feet long. It's amazing. I'd love to grow burdock like that one day. But to know that the root is really edible, and almost yeah, it's a root vegetable, you would say. So you could look at Chinese, Asian recipes for that. Okay, and yeah, lots to talk about here. Sorrel, nice sourness, and thistle. Yeah, we're gonna have to move on. Just give me a little bit of a go, but yeah, lots to talk about.
Yeah, the one thing I just
you can choose grass too.
Yeah. Yeah, you can chew grass. We have a lot to talk about here. Honestly, if you get the opportunity to learn from Tom, take one of his workshops. He is such a wealth of knowledge here. I'm going to give him a section to plug his upcoming courses, but this is really moving into the realm of Nature's Chef Academy here. He can teach you to transform your foods into some amazing stuff, but I really want to get him to talk about this next section here, because this, I think, is probably something that people are not going to hear a lot about.
Okay.
Yeah, Megan's just asking what Tom's website is, and it's www.natureschef.ca, and we'll have a link for that coming up here in a second.
Right. Okay. So we getting into this?
Yeah.
So as in terms from foraging, yeah, just this whole like mindset as we're going now, and I think a big part is this like remembering, right? Because a lot of this has been forgotten, so we're bringing this back and having this relationship with the land that we inhabit, right? So I think that's a big thing. And like a lot of times people go out and for that with the intention to forage, but they're looking down. So I invite you to like look up and observe the trees. That they are our ancestors, and remembering them. Get to know your trees. If you get to know your tree names, it's like remembering your relatives' names. Like just for instance, the maple tree. Canadians here, we have our maple leaf flag. A lot of people don't know that these trees, in the springtime, the blossoms come out. So maple leaf blossoms are like one of my top wild foods for sure. Almost like kind of like a broccoli floret kind of thing when they just sprout out, really still tight clusters. You could just eat them raw like that. You could dip them in batter and fritter them. Really nice. I've dehydrated them with like kind of like a hemp batter and dehydrating with that with some nettles as well. It's really nice battered. I've also ferment them. I always do a batch of fermented maple blossoms. It's a good one. Right. And then you have the maple seeds as well. Like the seeds are super high in protein. Harvest them a little younger, that they're not older. And then of course you got the the maple syrup you could tap. And out here on the West Coast, we have the big leaf maple. Okay, and the wood's amazing for smoking, preserving. You know, when you smoking, you're preserving your meats and fish and all that. Then it's a good cooking wood as well. Get to know your woods for cooking, because different woods have different flavors and different purposes, how they burn differently. Anyways, that's just maple alone. I could do a workshop just on maple. Get to understand that coniferous trees have a cambium layer. There's this layer in between the bark and the core of the wood that has a carbohydrate. So something like pine and spruce are more common ones to harvest, more in the springtime. But to find carbohydrates in the wild, it's a tough one. So for me, like survival, like say, like didn't understand that you have food source underneath in these trees. That's amazing. Something to know. And you know, first people they've harvested the cambium off trees, but that's a big project. I've never done that yet, but just to understand that there's carbohydrate there. Cambium, and then the tree tips, amazing. Like in springtime, the spruce, and I love to spruce it up. You know, things like just you take the tips and you could put them in vinegar alone and preserve them that way. That's a quick and easy one. You could dry the spruce tips and powder them and incorporate that into your meals. All right. Get to know the pollen of your trees. Like the pine pollen is a superior, and the spruce pollen, the tree pollens are amazing. Amazing health benefit for balancing our hormones. And I love to incorporate pollen into desserts. All right. So yeah, get to know your trees for sure. And the resin that comes from trees, like they have many uses, medicinal uses as well, for sore muscles, really good, or for cuts and wounds. It kind of works as like nature's Band-Aid. So that's definitely something to know. In terms for like, I just thinking carbohydrates, like something to get really full off. So something from cattail comes to mind. Yeah, you have the picture there, cattail. It kind of looks like a corn dog or something like that on the top. Cattail shoots in the springtime. Amazing edible green. Okay, so good. It's a plant of 1,000 uses. But we talked about carbohydrates, so the rhizomes, the root system, that has amazing starch there, right? The starch could be pounded, and you could extract the starch that way, or you could even just roast the rhizomes on coals and just chew it that way. Get the starch out. Amazing. And when it starts to go to the pollinated buds, you could eat those like a corn, right? Just blanch and boil them for a couple minutes and toss them in butter and salt, and they are delicious and nutritious. So cattail is an amazing one. Also many tool uses that come from the cattail. There was a picture of the bull kelp. I think the bull kelp was like here on the West Coast, like we had the bull kelp, amazing, very high protein, super abundant. The fronds, right, the leafy bits that come from it, those are amazing. You could just eat them raw like this out of the water. And they dry really well. Like when you dry it, seaweeds have the longest shelf life, like 10 years without losing its nutrition, I've been told. But so the bulk kelp and all your seaweeds, if you live in coastal, get to know your seaweeds. It's a whole world to explore. And when it comes to like, there's just it's very sustainable. You know, if we could harvest them all like this. Many tool uses that come from the bull kelp. Like the indigenous people, they used it for many purposes, like storing their food. All right, that was the bull kelp. You know, you could store oils in it that way. Yeah, I don't know how much time. I'm just kind of, it's 12 o'clock here, Josh, so I wasn't sure I could keep going. How are we doing? Are you good?
Turn your mic on, Josh.
Oh,
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just saying we're having a bit of issues with the slides changing on the YouTube stream here, so I'm gonna try. Hopefully this fixes it here.
Yeah, it's weird. It's changing in Restream, but not on YouTube.
okay.
So
They could still
Okay.
hear.
Yeah, I think that should work. So
hey,
yeah, so if obviously there's, as you tell, Tom has such an incredible wealth of knowledge here. Again, I mentioned that we are going to be launching a podcast, and Tom has agreed to be our first guest. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited to have him back
Yeah.
and continue this conversation because there's so much to talk about.
So
Again,
much.
we could do he could probably do a week-long retreat just on the maple tree itself. So yeah, and if you ever have the opportunity to actually eat some of his food in person, jump on it. And if that means you need to travel across the ocean, it's worth it. So
Go up by canoe.
yeah, so again, we're just about out of time here right now, but I wanted to give you a chance, Tom, to talk about your new Nature Chef Online Academy and some of the upcoming events. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as we're in this like new normal, I'm trying to adapt with the times, and I'm more out in nature kind of guy. So I'm just learning how I could be more of use to a greater community online. So this year, my intention and one of my goals was to put more content online, and somehow that I could share the knowledge and have more nature chefs. I believe everyone's got a nature chef in them. We all had somewhere, so I'm not the only one. Like we gotta sow these seeds and yeah, bring the nature and food together, this connection that Josh has been touching on. So yeah, on my website I've been updating that, so I have a whole online services now page, and so every Fridays I'm doing the Zoom, and after I'm also going to be incorporating having a library of videos that you could watch in your own time. So figuring it all out, and I love to do some podcasts with Josh and get good conversations going, because honestly, like each plant has so much to teach us. So let's reconnect.
Awesome. Such an honor to have you here, Tom. Always great when we can spend some time together. So really looking forward to more of that in the future. So Zone 5, the wild and unknown. So in permaculture, Zone 5 is often referred to as kind of a hands-off area. But now we're realizing that there's a flaw in even the concept of the wild, this idea that there actually is this realm that exists beyond our influence. But the reality is that we are constantly influencing everything around us, and there is no part of the earth that has not been impacted by human activity. So with that comes a huge responsibility in how we engage with nature, and also how we engage with the unknown. Zone 5 is also sometimes referred to as like the frontier of our knowing. And as part of that, this can extend to events that perhaps we don't know, we're unsure of. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest challenges of an emergency, is the uncertainty. What is going to happen, and what emergencies are we going to face? But what I want to impart here is this idea that this is, we are all part of nature. And, in nature, there's no concept of an emergency. It's just an event that's happening. And while it may be challenging to our notions and our egos, pretty much every emergency that we can imagine is something that is actually very natural. We think that they're not natural, and that's where they often kind of come and get us, because we're not expecting them, we're not preparing for them. But the indigenous people all around the world have always been preparing for winter. They've always been preparing for these unknowns, always been preparing for emergencies. And we have that opportunity as well. Unless we're actively in an emergency ourselves, we have time to prepare for that emergency. And hopefully we've imparted something of value to you all that you can use not only to prepare for emergencies, but also just to feel more connected to yourselves, to each other, to nature in and of itself. And hopefully this idea of a emergency isn't quite so scary anymore. There's a lot of opportunities to harvest foods, whether it's wild, whether it's domesticated, whether it's from our grocery store, something that we can replant. We have a lot of options, and we have a lot of support from nature. So with that, I just want to thank you all. I really want to thank you all for showing up and having the interest in this event here, because as each one of us becomes more prepared and starts to become more connected to nature, that has a ripple effect on us all. So as one person prepares, it actually prepares us all. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to be of interest to this year and to start making preparations and to start preparing yourselves and to be more connected, because it has a huge impact on us all. So truly thank you. And with that, we have a couple other workshops that are coming up here. So we have in March a perennial vegetables and edible ornamentals workshop. So this is where we're going to be shifting away from some of the more fast-growing annual plants to perennial vegetables and plants that are going to come back each year. So once you have your base level of food security, the perennial plants, these are the ones that are going to keep on coming back year after year and are not going to need to be replanted. So that means easier garden seasons in the future and earlier harvests. Most perennials are going to be ready earlier than annual vegetables. Much more resilient to pests. So tons to talk about there. And then if you're really interested in taking a deeper dive into the food forestry and this idea of actually how to design and co-create an edible ecosystem, not just thinking about vegetables that are going to be kind of growing up to knee-high or waist-high, but actually considering a garden that grows vertically, right? A food forest is often considered to be the ultimate vertical garden. So, you sometimes see vertical gardens with a trellis that's maybe 6 feet tall, and that's great. You get a lot of harvest out of a small space, but imagine you're able to harvest from 100 feet tall or 150 feet tall. So that's where the real magic starts to happen. And food forestry is where we get to completely transform our concept of food in and of itself. So, one of my wild and crazy dreams and visions is that everybody has access to a food forest, right? So that nobody has to worry about food, because there's just really no reason. If we were more in tune with nature and the way that nature grows food, we don't need to worry about food. Food is really not the issue. It's actually our capacity to engage with nature. So if you're interested in food forestry, we're going to be doing a deep dive weekend workshop there, focusing on the design of it. And then on May 15th, we're going to take a look at the plants themselves. So the April workshop is going to be more the theoretical design, the how-to, and then the May 15th workshop is going to be looking specifically at the plants, primarily focusing on plants that are going to be working on the Pacific Northwest, as well as kind of temperate food forest areas. So kind of all across Canada, northern United States. I noticed there's some folks from Panama, South America, Egypt, Israel. Now these are areas that are going to be a little bit outside of my experience level, but stay tuned. We're probably going to have something coming for you all in that through the podcast. So as a little thank you here, we are offering a 15% off our upcoming workshops. So we're going to send out a feedback form to the people who registered to the workshop here. And once you have completed the feedback form, you will receive a discount code that you can apply to our future workshops to get 15% off. And if you're curious about more of our workshops, check out our website at ediblelandscapesdesign.com/workshops. That's where you're going to stay in the loop. And if you want to stay in the loop with more videos, please click the like and subscribe button on our YouTube channel. We're going to have a bunch more videos and workshops streaming. This is where we're going to release our podcast videos. Probably going to do some more just live conversations as well, some garden tours. So lots of resources going to be coming down the pipeline here. And please reach out and ask for help if you have any questions. Thank you for everybody who has reached out already here. And yeah, ask for help. And when I say ask for help, I don't just mean ask us for help, but just really ask for help. So that's coming back to this skills for resilience. Got to talk about what you're going through. So if you're having a difficult time, growing something, reach out, ask the grandmas in your life, ask the grandmas in your neighborhood. There's so many people here who are going to have so much information to share, and you are not alone. And that doesn't extend just to the garden here. If you need help with anything, it's important that we just be vulnerable and talk about what that help may be, because that's where we really start to build intimacy and connection with each other. And ultimately, that is where resilience comes from. So with that, just to wrap up, if people here are looking for some additional ongoing support, we do offer consultation and designs, as well as installation and maintenance here in the Greater Victoria area. And we will be having more podcast interviews coming. So please like and subscribe. Check out our website. We have a newsletter you can subscribe to on the website there. And yeah, we look forward to continuing this learning journey with you all. So with that, I'm just going to give Megan and Tom a quick moment to say thank you and goodbye. And we look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. I can't believe the turnout's so amazing. So yeah, it was really great. And hopefully we see you at our next workshops and hear more from you guys. Good luck with everything this season.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh, Megan, for hosting this and putting it out there. I'm so grateful to be part of this. And yeah, we're really in this together. We are the Earth Tribe. We shall rise up. And yeah, let's do this. The greater reset, as I like to say. All right. So stay close. I like to say, the closer to you are to nature, the less distance there is to fall. Someone that's told me that, and I resonated with that. So, Tahoe.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for joining us. That was awesome.
Excellent. Thank you all. We are going to stick around here for a couple of minutes. If people have questions, you can type some questions out in the chat here, and we'll take a few minutes to answer any questions people may have. I'm just going to mute my mic for 1 second here. Awesome. Okay. What sort of questions do we have? Wow. Questions are pouring in.
I like, can I eat this? Can I eat that? Fennel.
Free seeds. I'm not sure.
Free seeds?
Yeah.
About free seeds. Talk to your neighbors.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest one. Talk to your neighbors. I know here in Victoria, there's a seed library. Seed libraries are becoming more common all around. So that's, again, a place where you can go and take some seeds out and grow them for the season and save some and bring them back. So if you don't have a seed library in your area, it's a great way to start building connections is to just create one. You don't even need to have seeds in order to start it. You just need to have a mailbox. There's actually I read an article about someone here in Victoria. I think they're their gardening company was, I think it was called Anytime Gardening, like Anytime, THYME, like time, like the spice, Anytime Gardening. I believe it was called. If that person's listening right now, I'm sorry if I got it wrong, but they just got an old mailbox and they put it on out front of their house and they painted it and wrote seed library on it. And soon enough, people just started coming by and putting seeds in it. So it can be really easy to get started if you don't already have one. Otherwise,
There's
this is where the observation comes. Start looking around, look for things that are going to seed and start collecting them.
Mm-hmm. And there's like Facebook garden groups that are popping up everywhere from since the start of COVID. So you can just find those, and people are always sharing stuff, sharing seeds and things. So many questions.
Someone was mentioning there's Seedy Saturday events kind of throughout Canada. I'm not sure if they're around other places as well, but they often have a seed, like a seed exchange. With COVID, our Victoria Seedy Saturday has been canceled, which is quite sad because that was always such a great time to get together with people and just kind of kickstart the growing season and connect with all the other plant people. But anyhow, that will return.
Are you going through them, Josh?
Yeah, I'm kind of going through. I'm just gonna. Yeah, what else do we got here?
Deterring deer. That's a tough one around here. We have really voracious deer, but
Yes.
fencing is really the best if you can.
There's so Jack Spirko has this line talking about deer. He says, people always complain that the deer are eating their garden, and what he says to people is, I don't see a problem. The way I see it, your garden is growing venison stew. So anyhow, in a non-emergency situation,
if you could hunt them in the city, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, there's different ways of looking at that, but ultimately plants to deter the deer, I think you're going to be hard pressed. Even the most deer tolerant or deer resistance, there's no such thing as a deer proof plant. Depending on where the area that you're in, it really just depends on how hungry the deer are and how young the deer are, because the young deer are going to eat pretty much anything. And if there's a lot of deer pressure in the neighborhood, again, they're going to eat pretty much anything. So I haven't found any success with using plants to deter the deer. Some people can use sometimes hook up like sprinklers to motion sensors to spray the deer as they come around if you're not allowed to have a fence. So different options. What were you going to say, Tom?
I was just saying, to growing in abundance is the goal. So there you have enough food for the deer too. I know just some of the organic farms, they will feed the deer like all the kind of trimming and stuff when they process the vegetables. So they'll just leave a pile for them like on the side, and the deer know, and they'll just eat that, and they won't go into the.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right?
I kind of do that too. I just throw my extra veggies over the fence, and yeah, the deer eat those. But
I'm seeing somebody here. I read it wrong first, but they said, I got a lion from the zoo. It worked for me. But it says they got lion dung from the zoo. This worked for me. That's interesting.
What? Whoa, cool. Wow.
I have heard, one of our teachers and mentors, Brandon Bauer, who lives on Salt Spring Island, who is really one of the most inspirational people that I know. He's done some amazing work with the East Africa Permaculture Project. And he has done some incredible work providing food security all around the world. He says you can make what's called bone sauce, which is not going to be something that you can make in the city because it smells quite horrifying. But you can just boil deer bones down until they turn into kind of a thick paste, and then you can put those, spread that onto the trunks of your trees and your kind of tender plants. And big surprise, deer don't like the smell of their cooked down bones. A little bit dark, kind of horrifying, but hey, this is part of how we can reconnect with nature. So there's an opportunity there. But if you're living in Oak Bay, making bone sauce in your backyard may not going to be on the table for you.
Next question. Oh my god, I don't even know where we are.
So many questions.
Someone was asking about the book Tom referenced with the. Can you just show that again or type it in the chat? Which book you were referencing? People were asking a lot during the show for the book recommendation. So if you guys want to type it in or something, or just show it for people. What's it called, Tom? Food. I can't see it very well.
Here, I'll try to make this.
Food Plants.
Make them big.
And it's from Nancy Turner, and I can put it in the note.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh,
there you go. That's better.
how's that? Cool.
Good.
Somebody is asking, why is comfrey poisonous? I am not a biochemical expert, but I just know it's not something you want to eat a ton of. I'm becoming way more careful about the nutritional claims and the plant details I claim. The other day I was pruning somebody's fruit tree, and we were talking about using the apple wood to smoke meat, and our client said, "Oh yeah, I can't wait to smoke this, use this apple wood so I can, get all the carcinogens in me." And I once read a Facebook post about how rosemary and thyme can be used to kind of counteract the carcinogenic effects. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to share my vast knowledge with him. And he said, "Yeah, I'm kind of skeptical about that. I actually have I think he said he has a PhD in biochemistry, majoring in nutrition." I was like, oh, okay. I'm a little bit more careful with saying that. So I don't know exactly. Maybe, do you have something to say about that, Tom?
Yeah, I feel there's been like a lot of like fear driven and to like overdosing. So I think the key is it's just like moderation, and it was with like carcinogens, like so if like fiddleheads, like if you ate them every day like in abundance, you start to accumulate and it would become a issue. So I just like to eat a variety diet and not to consistently eat something every day, like switch it up, like just nibble on things, like a little micro dose rather than like overdoing something, right? Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
Going through the questions here. Thanks for your feedback, everyone.
I've got to head out. I've got a call in 5 minutes from a client. So I'm going to have to take that. And my neighbor is using a chainsaw. It's getting really loud.
Oh, no.
So I'm going to sign out here.
Thanks, Tom. Sweet. That was great.
All right.
Thank you so much, Tom. Absolute pleasure. Look forward to reconnecting again here.
Future.
Oh. It's a little choppy.
Well, we might have lost Tom there.
Yeah, I think good time.
That worked out well that it cut out at the very end.
Oh,
okay,
no.
I'm just gonna kill Tom's video here.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll stick around here for a little bit. Somebody gave an answer. Comfrey, pyrrolizidine alkaloids cause liver and lung damage as well as cancer. So, okay, we have an answer there.
Yeah, if you eat too much, I think you're supposed to, I don't know, if you focus on the smaller leaves, it's better. When I eat comfrey, I only have like 2 or 3 leaves at a time. I like batter it with buckwheat and fry it, and it's so good. But I am only eating a couple leaves, so I don't think I've never had any bad effect from it.
Mm-hmm. But again, this is not medical advice. We'll say that much. Please consult a qualified medical professional for such information. Okay.
People are asking more about deer protection, and yeah, I think dogs. If you have a dog that likes chasing them, that's great. If you have a yard where you can have your dog run around more often, that's a pretty good deer deterrent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else? And then
well, we'll just stick around for maybe a minute more here if people have another question.
if we didn't get to your question and it got lost, you can just post it again if you are still around.
Yeah. And we'll be sending out a feedback form here with that discount code and maybe some other goodies. I'll take a look through our resources and see if there might be something that's helpful to send out to folks. But again, we really appreciate the feedback. It helps us to improve and get better at what we do. So, yeah, you can tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see changed, as well as some opportunities to request future workshops. So, one person asked about what are some potted plants for container gardening in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll probably actually host a workshop to do that. There's a ton of different options. A lot of the plants that we talked about in Zone 1 are going to be plants that you can grow in pots. I forgot to mention that in the talk, but pretty much all of those are great options. But yeah, I think we will host a edible potted garden. Probably focusing as well on perennials because that's something that is often not grown. Perennials for pots, but yeah, pretty much everything in that zone 1 section can be grown in containers.
So for the composting education, there's the Compost Education Center here in Victoria. That's just a really great resource. They have free stuff on their website. I just posted the link. And they do compost workshops too. We don't really do compost workshops because they do just such a good job. I don't know. We just direct people there. I mean, maybe in the future we will do one, but for now, if you're looking to get your hands dirty, you can check them out. I think they're doing a bunch right now online. So
yeah, there's the Compost Education Center has these amazing fact sheets for all the different forms of composting. So they have the information sheets are incredible, to be honest. That's why we just don't do it. We bow to the masters there. They have like a fact sheet for worm composting, for trench composting, for 3-bin, for every kind of composting that you can imagine. They're going to have a fact sheet with the techniques. It'll tell you how easy it is, how-tos. It's just they've been doing it a long time, and those, even if you don't live in Victoria, you can still check out that website. The techniques are going to be applicable throughout the world. Somebody's asking an eco-friendly way to get rid of snails, ants, and earwigs. Well, I'm not sure about ants, but I do know that snails and slugs, there's a kind of a famous quote in the world of permaculture by Bill Mollison that he says, "You don't have a snail problem, you have a duck deficiency." And you could say that about slugs as well. You don't have a slug problem, you have a duck deficiency. So rather than looking at these as pests that need to be eradicated, see them as an opportunity and as part of the food cycle. So for ducks in particular, Indian runner ducks, are probably the best for eating slugs. They kind of they're pretty cute ducks as well. They have these really long necks and just kind of make you smile when you see them run around.
Well, you know what? I just saw a company posted that they're renting out their ducks for slug control in people's gardens. I thought that was so cool. I don't know. My next life, I want to do that. That sounds so sweet. I think they're in Cowichan Valley though. So if you're in like Cowichan area, I totally forgot their name, but anyways, if you do a little Google, I'm sure you can find them. But
yeah, shout out to Chris Adams here in Victoria. Some people may know Chris Adams. He is one of the most inspiring people I know. He operates the Chinatown and Ghost Tours here with his dad. And when I first met him was at my permaculture design course, and he was wearing like an 18th century suit with a top hat and a coat with tails and rubber boots. And shortly after, he was herding his ducks down the street to his neighbors' yards, and they were eating slugs. He had gardens all over the neighborhood, and it is quite a sight to behold him herding his ducks throughout the neighborhood. So yeah, if that isn't available in your neighborhood, it is a really great opportunity for a business. And you can essentially get paid to feed your ducks, which is pretty amazing. Duck eggs are really high in protein and fats as well. A lot of health benefits to duck eggs. And again, they're a lot gentler on your plants than chickens, and will actually also eat the slugs. So great option having ducks. Somebody asked, can we touch on hydroponics? That's not my area of expertise. It's pretty technical, and I'm not an expert in that. So I don't really touch on it that much. I have done some aquaponics in the past, and we'll probably have somebody in to talk about that on the podcast. But at this point, those are pretty technical areas that also, to be honest, they're not of huge interest to me. So I kind of leave that to people who are really passionate about it. I think it's a great solution for cities in particular. But for myself, I just like being close to the earth.
Rosie, I'm just going to go back a bit. Rosie Smith asked about milk thistle. Is super easy to grow. It's pretty much like a weed once you get it established, so you have to be careful. But yeah, you can grow it in Scotland. I'm sure it's it's very easy to grow. And then Pat next mentioned, can you touch on stinging nettles? I'm not sure what you want us to talk about, but they are super abundant in most areas, in northern areas and wetter areas. So if you go into areas of your forest, they're like usually under the canopy in wet areas. So seasonally wet areas, maybe like just beside a swamp or a marsh, or just areas that kind of get wet over the winter. And I will just walk through the forest and just like eat them. I don't even cook them. Sometimes I'll just like pick them with I have more callus on my finger because I'm a gardener, but with like the callus part of my fingers, I'll just like pinch off the top and then squish it in my fingers, and then you can eat it raw that way. I don't know, a little bit, but cooking is nice though. Definitely.
The seeds are really high in protein. They're a very important indigenous food source here. There's a number of these plants that are, I sometimes hesitate to talk about them in a really big open forum like this here, because there's a lot of these more traditional foods that are really getting over harvested. And a lot of times, whether people are new to foresting and they just don't understand the ethics and the importance of, not harvesting the healthiest plant, the biggest plant, not taking more than 30% of the plants that are there, always, making sure that there's plants that go to seed and propagated. These aren't ethics that we really grow up with. And then there's other people who harvest it at a commercial scale just for profit, and they'll sometimes just completely decimate wild populations of food. So nettles, grows prolifically, but it's also one of those ones that sometimes can be over harvested in certain areas. So again, this one spreads quite easily and quite well. So it's not in danger of becoming extinct. But at the same point in time, you just want to be really, really conscious about how we're interacting with wild plants.
Brother Love mentioned how to defeat wild grass in a small plot. It's pretty hard to outcompete grass with many things other than just shading it out or pulling it out. We use the sheet mulching method to get rid of most grasses, which is like laying down a thick layer of cardboard, and then on top of that, you mulch your soil to suppress it. That's kind of the easiest way, so you don't have to do any digging. But anything else, Josh, you think?
Sorry, I was just going through other questions there. Sorry, what did you say?
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, just getting rid of grasses in a small plot.
Oh, yeah. So it depends on the type of grass. If I'm repeating what Megan said, my apologies. There's different forms. So you're going to see like on a lawn, for example, and that's not your question. You're asking about wild grasses. Very difficult. What I will say is that there's kind of this back and forth dynamic between grasslands and forest ecosystems. So forest ecosystems are primarily fungally based in the soil, and grasslands are bacterially based soil. So under the ground, you're going to be seeing this kind of war of microbes. There's going to be the fungally based ecosystem, and those are going to be the tree forest ecosystems. And in order to nurture that fungi, the deciduous trees are going to be dropping leaves on the ground to essentially try to snuff out the grass. And then the grass is going to send runners into the forest ecosystem, trying to kind of colonize there. So there's this back and forth dynamic. So probably the best way to outcompete the grass is by putting a whole bunch of carbon down on it. So that can look like cardboard or a really thick layer of wood chips. But again, it's going to be difficult to outcompete the native grass without digging it out. So when we're doing our lasagna gardening or sheet mulching, if we see a patch of like really tough native grass, like crabgrass or quackgrass, we sometimes call it here, we'll dig out those little clumps and then cover it with cardboard and wood chips or mulch. But that's pretty much the best you can do with that.
I just want to touch on the next Claire's, because she asked a couple times about brassica pests. Dealing with brassicas, I know they get so aphidy, or they can get really finicky. I think one main point to touch on with the brassicas is that, or with pests in general, is that actually your plants, when they're stressed or not getting enough nutrients, for whatever reason they're a bit stressed out, they're going to actually attract pests more. So it's kind of like nature's way of weeding out like the not so strong genetics, the not so strong plants. And it's actually a good thing that they're helping with this evolution. So the best thing you could do is make sure, your soil is great, full of minerals and everything the plant needs. It's getting enough water. And if it's outside, it's going to have some natural pests. You could like introduce some like ladybugs, ladybug larvae. You could do that route too. If you've tried everything else, you can get like the babies of ladybug, like the small ladybugs, I guess, are the ones that eat the aphids. But yeah, I think it's just about supporting the whole ecosystem, maybe like creating habitat for predators, the natural predators that are around, for them to thrive, for them to then eat the aphids, eat the things that are eating your garden. So it's like looking at it from like a more holistic approach is a great thing to do. And yeah, it is tough though. Sometimes you just gotta let some go. Sometimes if I get one plant that's off it, like just getting destroyed by aphids, I'll just take it out fully, take it out of the garden. But yeah.
Another thing sometimes folks will do is just hose it down really hard, and that kind of disrupts the breeding cycle. So you can also make a spray out of garlic, actually. So you can grind up garlic or blend garlic with a bit of dish soap and neem oil, and blend that up, strain it through a cheesecloth, and put it into a spray bottle and spray it down like that. But again, the more holistic approach is ultimately the better approach. So, interestingly enough, having predatory wasps in your garden is a really great option. Having plants that attract wasps, like chives and other insectiary plants, will bring in wasps. And last year I was out in my garden, and there was a couple of bean plants that I had that were just being feasted on by aphids, but they only seemed to be going to the bean plant. A couple of specific bean plants, I didn't even pull them out because they were all just congregating on that one plant. And I just let it happen because then they weren't going to other plants. And when I would go out each day, I would see these wasps. We had a couple wasp nests that were kind of difficult to get to. And we ended up not killing the wasp nest, which there's a great reason for them, because those wasps were just going in and just devouring these aphids off the plant. So again, so often we're viewing a pest as a problem when it's really not a problem at all. It's part of the ecosystem, and that pest is going to be food for something else. So, trying to kill it may be meaning that something else goes hungry. So yeah, it's not probably a satisfying answer, but it's an answer. Someone was mentioning that row covers for brassicas helps. Yes, definitely. Yeah, great answer there.
I don't have too much more time here. I gotta get rolling, but
yeah, I've got to get rolling here as well. I have a live audience here that I promised lunch, and I'm very grateful.
They're still hanging out. Nice.
Yeah. Shout out to Ocean and Sarah.
Okay, well, we will be talking a lot more about this stuff like in our next workshop. So there's just so much to talk about. And yeah, like Josh said before, we do offer consultations, and you don't even have to live in the area. We can just do like a phone style one or Skype, whatever. If you need more specific help with anything in your yard.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll be sending out an email to folks again here for some feedback. And if you have other questions, it's a great place to ask there. And again, just so grateful for everybody who attended today and everybody who shared the event. It's so helpful. If you receive some value from this, probably the best thing that you can do to help support us is just to tell people about it, to share, let them know what we're up to, and take action yourselves. I didn't mention it in the workshop, but I always say that, we're all students and we're all teachers. And again, I've already learned so much through this, just setting it up, but also through your comments and engagements. We are not the ones with all the answers here. We are very much students, and we're learning and striving to continue being students. So please keep sharing your information, your knowledge, and your wisdom. Reach out and help each other. And and it helps us all. So again, thank you all so much here. And unless Megan has anything to add, so much gratitude to you all. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
All right.
Okay.
How do I shut this off? Aha, there it is. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Have an awesome weekend.